Good evening. Good evening. Good to see everybody out here this evening. We've got a pretty good crowd. We've got some visitors that we haven't seen in a while. It's good to have you all. We're going to do our first night of Vacation Bible School, and as you see, the theme is a royal adventure. We're going to talk about some of the kings in the Bible, and there are a few of them. Pretty good ones too sometimes, most of the time, a lot of the time. And then we get to talk about Jesus a lot on Thursday night, so it'll be a really good time. My name is Scott, if you don't know me, and if you need anything while you're here this week, you just let me know, or any of the adults, and they can help you. If you're looking for the bathroom, it's back there in that back corner. You go out to the hallway and go all the way down, and you'll see those. Then if you have to, well, there, I'll talk about that later. When you're in your class this evening, before I forget to tell you, when we come back out here in just a little bit after classes, I'm going to have some questions for you. So make sure that you listen really good in class, okay? And so if you answer the questions, it'll be good, all right? Everybody be like, whoa, they're really smart. Also, we have two banners that we always give away. The attendance banner and then the quiet banner. The quiet banner is really hard to give away because that means you got to be quiet a lot, all right? So each class will be graded on that as you go in and out in here, and as you're in your classes. If we got secret people that walk by, and if they hear you in your classes being loud when you're not supposed to be, that you take a hit. You get a demerit, and you don't get a flag probably, or a banner. These are new banners. I think they were new last year too, weren't they, Eddie? I think they're about as old as Eddie. So, but they're staying together pretty good. No, I'm assuming you made those, didn't you? Okay. Okay. They were made in your tenure, though? Eddie used to do this. Eddie did this for 12 years. So I had to take over a few years ago, but Eddie still, he still knows the best ways to do things sometimes, especially in those banners. We're going to sing a couple songs each night when we come here, okay? And then we'll go to our classrooms, and then we'll come back out, ask some questions, talk a little bit, and then we'll sing another song, and then we'll go home. But we got all kinds of time in between that, okay? So let's start with this song. Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. Jesus died for all the children, all the children of the world. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. Jesus died for all the children of the world. Now there's a third verse to that song that wasn't in our PowerPoint, and we're just changing one word. Jesus rose for all the children, okay? So let's sing it that way. Jesus rose for all the children, all the children of the world. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. Jesus rose for all the children of the world. That fulfills the gospel. If Jesus had not rose, the gospel would not have been completed, and we wouldn't have salvation. And you'll learn more about that this week. All right, everybody stand up. I've been getting the adults ready for this song for a week or two now. So some of them might, oh, well, look at that. They're standing up. We know this song. I don't have the words to it, so we'll just have to remember as we go, okay? I'm in the Lord's army. I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I'm in the Lord's army. I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. Good job. You can sit down now. We'll sing one more song and then we'll go to our classes, okay? Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya, kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya, kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya, oh Lord, kumbaya. Someone's praying, Lord, kumbaya. Someone's praying, Lord, kumbaya. Someone's praying, Lord, kumbaya. Oh Lord, kumbaya. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Oh Lord, come by here. Good job. Now, we're going to go to our classes, and remember, we got to be really, really quiet. Walk in a straight line and follow your teachers, and when you get in there, just be really quiet while they teach you. They might ask you to say something or ask you to answer a question, and that's okay. Just be really quiet and respectful, okay? All right, so first we have the little ones, the ages 1 through K. You all can go. I'm not going to sing my song because nobody ever sings with me. I tried it for 5 years and never got it going. I'm done with it. Okay. But tiptoe little feet. All right, grades 1, 2, and 3. Grades 4, 5, and 6. And now all the gray-haired teens can follow right behind them. And the adults can stay right here. Tonight's speaker, you all know him. He's a regular around here. Keith Cole and his wife Sarah are here this evening with their children. He will be speaking for us this evening. They attend the Allen Creek congregation, and by way of 26th Street and a little bit of everywhere, I think they bounce around. But that's okay. We like them when he's here. We enjoy their family. We'll have 7:10 to about 7:40. Then we'll break for about 15 minutes, and everybody's got to be back in here at 7:55, okay? Because he's got all kinds of stuff that he needs to go over, and he's got to get it done. So I'll give you Keith. Thank you.
Good evening. It is wonderful to be with you all this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, to enjoy this VBS with you all. I enjoy any time that I'm able to be with you all and appreciate that opportunity very much. So we're looking at, make sure I get all this going here. This week's topic will be focusing on just thinking about kings and some of the great kings that are talked about in the Bible. And this evening, what we're going to begin with is King Solomon. What are some things that you recall about King Solomon? What are some things that stand out to you about him? His wisdom, that's right. It's probably the first thing we think about when it comes to King Solomon is the wisdom that he had. Yes, exactly. What are other things that you remember about him or that stand out to you? He's very rich. Talks about he was at the time probably one of the richest individuals in the world at that time. And that's the blessings that God gave to him. And we'll spend some time looking at that in just a few minutes. So we have his wisdom, his riches, anything else that stands out about him. The temple, that's exactly right. That's going to be a big focus of our topic this evening in the study that we'll spend. You might recall some other things about him, some of the, guess what you would call the less positive things about him, which we'll spend some time looking at that as well. What we'll really learn about King Solomon is, while being a great king as he was he always a perfect king? He wasn't, was he? He was human. That's exactly right. And that's a good thing to remember, because while Solomon did these wonderful things in the temple, and again, we'll talk about that, he still was human. He still had his struggles. And but I think that what we'll learn, and this is kind of my view of it, and I've looked at some commentators' views on it as well. While the Bible doesn't explicitly say that Solomon repented of the things that he did wrong, I seem to gather, or it appears to be, by the time we get to the end of Ecclesiastes, which we'll also spend some time looking at that just for a few minutes this evening, it seems to be that the lessons that Solomon learned, I feel that he probably repented of his sins. Now, does the Bible say that he did or not? No, we don't have that. But I kind of look at it from clues like that kind of help to see that Solomon seemed to maybe later in life come around back to this godly wisdom again. And it could be its own study, honestly, walking through Ecclesiastes and looking at what Solomon learned. And as we think about that, what he learned from the perspective of under the sun, which was more of just based off of what he wanted and what he thought was going to bring him happiness, versus what real and true happiness is found in God. And that's kind of his struggle, but also through that book, the things that he learned from that. But thinking about this, the early reign of King Solomon, he was very wise. And of course, he would ask for God's wisdom. And we'll look at that too in just a moment. But he, in his early days, made wiser decisions. And that's something that you'll really see in that. Because if you kind of want to start with me, let's look at 1 Kings, beginning in chapter 3. And we're not going to read all of this. But this is really the idea of Solomon and his wisdom really showing itself. Because you look at 1 Kings chapter 3, beginning in verse 3, it says, "And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places." Now that would be a problem for him later on. But you remember, if you've ever done any studies on that, the high places, what often took place on these high places as they were called? was usually idol worship, sacrifices to idol. It wasn't anything that was ever positive. So just keep that in the back of your mind. While this still kind of took place, and it didn't always mean that he was sacrificing to idols in this day. It sounded like what he was sometimes was still utilizing those altars, if you will, in that way, which still wasn't a positive thing. I think that still left the door open for some bad decisions to be made. But outside of that, still in his early days, that he did what was right in God's sight, as we see in verse 3. And you get down to verse 5. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask, what shall I give you?" And Solomon said, "You have shown great mercy to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in truth, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day." And then he says, "Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours?" In verse 10, the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. And I think through this, what we're seeing is that, he was a very and deeply religious individual at this time. To even to request of God this wisdom speaks a lot to, I think, who Solomon was. And just like all of us who strive living the Christian life, and as we already talked about, do we always follow everything perfectly? We don't, do we? Sometimes we fall short. Sometimes we willfully sin against God. Sometimes we just don't do what God asks us to do. Well, Solomon was in the same boat. But there were times that Solomon did the right thing, which we can still do the right thing. But I think this was important to him in those early days. And he followed the better wisdom of his father, David. Now, you remember David was a man after God's own heart, the Bible says. Now, was David always the most perfect individual? He wasn't, and we all know the Bathsheba account and how he had her husband put to death, Uriah. It was a bad time for David. This was a time in which David was at times a very wise and religious individual, just as Solomon is here as we're reading. But David fell short of God's glory. And you remember kind of that return to God when God sent Nathan the prophet to him. It opened David's eyes to repentance, and he returned back to the Lord. But the positive thing, while I brought that up, is you look at while David did those bad things, David still did things that was right in the sight of God. And that speaks a lot to David, because the things that he did right and in the will of God seemed to transfer, if you will, through the learning of Solomon. That Solomon saw the good things that David did and the righteousness in which David lived his life. And I think that impacted Solomon's life. And I think that's what he's really talking about here. So in this way, he followed the better wisdom of his father David, and before he kind of allowed himself to turn from God. But we're kind of looking at more of his earlier reign. So the idea of Solomon asking for wisdom, what we really are seeing here is that Solomon, and I think really wisely chose this wisdom, because he could have asked for all these other things, wealth. The Bible even talks about that. If you look at verse 9 there, this idea of the wealth, and it goes on to talk about those things, or even his enemies being delivered into his hand. But he chose this idea of wisdom. And look at verse 9 again, how he says it. Therefore, give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. Has there ever been times in your all's life where there's been hard decisions to make? And sometimes it may feel difficult to know what the right thing is to do and the right decision to make. And I think we all have been there. Well, Solomon on a greater level was king over this nation of Israel and what God had given him and appointed him to do. And just imagine, making decisions on the behalf of a nation. That's, to me, would be very overwhelming. So for him, I think he's choosing the right thing, isn't he? The wealth, his enemies, being delivered into his hand, that would be a blessing that God would give to him as he would continue to do the will of God. God would just richly bless him anyway. That was in God's, I think, what he wanted to do for Solomon, because he saw in Solomon's heart that Solomon he was doing the right thing, making wise decisions. So this is what he's really asking at this time. Solomon's going to be blessed, and you could look at this as we go. I know there's many verses, so I know because of time we can't read all of them, because God would go on to say in verse 11, and God said to him, because you have asked this thing and have not asked for long life for yourself, nor asked of riches for yourself, nor asked for the life of your enemies, but you've asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Behold, I have done according to your word. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. That's something, isn't it? And we look through the scriptures, and outside of Jesus, who was the Son of God, had all knowledge and wisdom, there was not ever another human individual outside of Jesus that was ever as wise as Solomon was there. None that we've ever encountered in the scriptures. And while there's wise people on earth, it seems that God really, in a special and specific way, gave Solomon a greater wisdom than anybody else ever had and ever would have. So that seemed very particular to that given situation, to Solomon. But you can see that God's going to bless him. And the biggest thing is, when somebody has wisdom, does it always mean that they use wisdom in the correct way? And that they don't always choose to do the right thing with wisdom, do they? And we can probably think of examples in the world today where, again, there's a lot of wise and intelligent and smart people, but they just don't choose the most wise things to do and the most wise path to follow. Does that make sense? So while a person can be wise, doesn't always mean they're going to choose to do the right and the wise thing. There you go. That's right. And there's a lot to be said about that, isn't there? Yeah. To be wise but not have the common sense to really go with that. Very good point. But the good thing is, in the case of Solomon, at this point in time, he used his wisdom wisely, and that's what set him apart. Now, you will remember, and again, because there's so many verses, I won't be able to read all of them, but you will remember as you go down through 1 Kings chapter 3, beginning in verse 16, the situation that arises after Solomon's given the wisdom by God. There comes two women and one with a child. Both were arguing, kind of fighting over whose child was this. Solomon knew that, okay, one is clearly the mother here. Well, not clearly, and it probably, if I was looking at it, I probably wouldn't be able to discern, well, which one's the mother or not. But through Solomon's wisdom, he kind of put a test out there to them, didn't he? Do you remember what the test was? That's right. He said, okay, what we'll do to make this fair, we'll split that child down in half. Give me this sword, I'll do it. That way, both of you have a part of that child. Now, to us, that logically, well, that will not work. And Solomon knew that. That's the thing. Through his wisdom, he knew that he's not going to do this. But the test was really to show who was the true mother. A true mother's not going to allow that to happen. And of course, the true mother stepped up, even to the point of saying, I will give this child to this other lady. Just don't let it be that the child will be done this way. I mean, that's something, isn't it? That's wisdom that we just normally wouldn't come to our mind to do that. But Solomon, through his wisdom that God gave him, did this thing. And of course, this wasn't just the only example of his wisdom being used, but this is a great one recorded for us to show just how wise Solomon was. And look at, as you go down to the end of the chapter there, in verse 28, and all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. His wisdom was seen throughout all of these areas, wasn't it? Throughout the world, if you will. I mean, and again, that speaks a lot to the wisdom of Solomon and what he asked of God. So again, I know we've covered kind of a lot already, just kind of this first little bit. Any thoughts, any questions that you all have as you kind of walk through these particular thoughts about Solomon, or anything that you all have thought about with him? And again, wisdom is, in this instance here, given by God. And that's why in verse 28, it's people were seeing this is wisdom of God that God has given to him. So people could see that this is a different type of wisdom that Solomon was, or that he had, you know. So again, what Solomon was doing was using wisdom in the proper way. Now, all of this translates now kind of into the study or kind of the topic this evening is that Solomon, through all of his wisdom and his desire to serve God, one of the biggest things that he wanted to do for God was to build him a temple, to build him a house, if you will. Now, before the temple was built, what was God's house? What did the Israelites use? The tabernacle, exactly. So it still housed God, but it was the tabernacle, you could take it down, move it around. It was kind of nomadic. It was just moved all over the place. Solomon, he wanted a more permanent temple, and God was going to allow this to happen. But do you remember there was another individual that wanted to build the house for God, a temple? Do you remember who that was? It was David. It was Solomon's own father. It was a desire of David to build a temple, a house for God. But what's interesting is, and we'll kind of look at some of these points, of course, the building of the temple being, you know, Solomon's crowning achievement. And actually, while we're kind of considering this, look with me, turn over to 1 Chronicles chapter 22. And looking at kind of beginning in verse 9 there. We'll look at that in just a second. What we really are seeing here is that the temple being built, I think, was always in the mind of God. It wasn't just something new that came to God. It was something that he had in his mind that it would be done. But now who would do the building? Now that was the thing. While David desired to do it, so it predated Solomon's desire to build the temple. His father David wanted to build the temple. But what was interesting was David was not given that authority to do so by God. And that's kind of interesting, isn't it? And that is sometimes, I think, God kind of works in our lives, that there might be something we desire to do for God, but maybe through providence that we don't get to do those things always. And it may be that out of a hard desire to do that, it may just not be in our best interest to do certain things at certain times. Or whatever the case is, that sometimes things don't always go as we would like them to when we're serving God. While most of the time we don't really run into issues, but there are times that maybe we do. It still could be God's providence working, that maybe he sees, well, I could better utilize you in this way. And maybe he, again, providentially allows opportunities to come our way, that he can utilize us in that way. So whatever the case was, or a case is for us, now specifically for David, he was a different man than Solomon was. You'll remember the life of David. He was a kind of a fighter, wasn't he? Kind of a tough individual. And you think back to the story of David and Goliath, a young little man like he was, to go against a 9-foot giant Goliath, and equipped with just the sling and a stone and the faith of 1,000 men. It's remarkable, and that speaks a lot of David and his faith in God. But David, as he grew up, was very much a man of war, and that's what we see in 1 Chronicles chapter 22, beginning in verse 9, because it says, "Behold, a son..." Let's start in verse 8. "But the word of the Lord came to me, saying, You have shed much blood and have made great wars." This is talking about David. This is while David was still alive. "And you have shed much blood and have made great wars. You shall not build a house for my name, because you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight. Behold," verse 9, "a son shall be born to you, who shall be a man of rest." There's our differences in the two individuals, isn't it? While David was a man of war, Solomon would not be to that extent. He would be a man of more of a rest, peace kind of king. "And I will give him rest from all his enemies all around. His name shall be Solomon. For I will give peace and quietness to Israel in his days. He shall build a house for my name, and he shall be my son, and I will be his father. And I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever." And that's something, a very specific prophecy about Solomon years before that ever happened. This was what God envisioned, that David wouldn't be the man to build the temple, even though David desired it. It was in God's wisdom that Solomon, his son, would build the temple. And this is what we're looking at this evening, is that Solomon gets that privilege to build the temple. Now, you turn back to 1 Kings, and our lesson this evening technically covers about the span of 3 chapters. There's no way we can cover, of course, all of this. But what most of these chapters are dealing with is the building of the temple. Now, again, because of time, we can't read all of this, but I know you all have studied the temple before. What did this temple look like as it's kind of described through the scriptures? What does it look like, or what could it have looked like? It's the best of the best, wasn't it? That's exactly right. And that's what you'll see. Beginning in chapter 6 and on through, chapter 8 or 9, this is a description of the temple. It talks about how it was built, what it was built with. It was magnificent in its structure. Yeah, just the like was said, best of the best. Beautifully, ornately decorated. Gold and tapestries of all these fine materials, even down to the items that would be used in worship. You remember that kind of how it was with the tabernacle. Well, in the temple, it was the items were there, but they were of gold and hand hammered and constructed. I mean, this is quite amazing, isn't it? And this is what was given Solomon the ability to oversee this being done, and having workers provided for him that could do this work. And the biggest thing, I think the most important thing about the temple, as beautiful and magnificent as it was, what we still see is just was mentioned earlier about the ark, about the tabernacle, or we didn't really talk about this, but within the tabernacle was found the Ark of the Covenant, wasn't it? And this is the specific thing in which God's glory would come down and kind of sit on or rest on. The Shekinah was his glory in the Hebrew. And this is what we find happening with the temple, that the Ark of the Covenant is given its place here, more permanently in the temple. So it's really God's presence, just as it was found in the tabernacle. Now it's going to be found in the temple. And now it's a more permanent place that his people can go to worship him. And with the priests, the high priest being able to encounter his glory, God could still be with his people. And I think that's an important thing that we kind of get out of looking at this beauty, of the temple and the greatness of the temple. So again, this is, we could spend a whole lot more time looking at all the ins and outs of the temple, but take some time and look at chapters 6, 7, and 8, and just look at the beauty found there. And I know you all have studied it before, so it's nothing new, but just kind of a reminder of the greatness of it and the privilege that was given Solomon to be able to oversee that structure. And just imagine how pleasing that was to Solomon to be able to do that and to finally see it when it's all done. It's kind of a desire fulfilled, wasn't it? And now here's what's interesting, and I think we'll go for our break then because we're about right on time. Think about how desires in our life are sometimes. There are desires that we all have. Now, some desires are good and positive. Sometimes desires are not so good. Sometimes they're sinful. Think about that in terms of Solomon. His desires in his early days was for doing the right thing, being wise, being in a relationship with God. But we'll find, and this is what we'll look at after our break, and this will finish out our class tonight on the second half, is Solomon shifts that focus, those desires from godly things to wicked things. It completely upends his life when you really stop and look at what it did to him. I mean, it messed his life up, and it would actually affect the generations that will come after him because of the things that he did. And that's what we'll spend time looking at. So just think about desires. They can be good, but at the same time, there are desires in this world that are not good, that are outside of God's will. And it's knowing, of course, the difference in the two and leaning to the things that are right in God's sight, because that's going to do us well. It's going to keep us healthy, positive, spiritually speaking as well, of course. But if we go the other way, it doesn't go well, does it, for us? And of course, it didn't go well for Solomon. So we'll put a peg in that right there. And then after one other idea is looking at 1 Kings 8:13. This is one point I wanted to make here. When the temple was done, because that's kind of what you find in the middle part of chapter 8. Verse 10 says, "And it came to pass when the priests came out of the holy place," this is after it's all been built, the Ark of the Covenant's been placed back in there, "that the cloud filled the house of the Lord," and that's God's glory, "so that the priests could not continue ministering because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord." Look at Solomon's statement. In verse 13, he says, "I have surely built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell in forever." And this is what the temple meant. It was an exalted house, wasn't it? And that's kind of the end result that Solomon was working towards. And again, falling back into that idea of a good and healthy desire that he had. It was godly, wasn't it? And it was a fulfillment to him that he was able to do that for the Lord. So, all right, I think we are right on time, so we'll put that peg right there, and we'll come back and look at Solomon's struggles and kind of wrap that up, that last little bit, I think, more on a positive note. It's what we'll look at here shortly. It doesn't seem positive, which it isn't, but I think the end for Solomon was, I think positive, and some lessons that we can learn from him. So, all right, thank you all. Yep, that was perfect timing. right, we'll go ahead and pick back up here. So as we were thinking earlier, Solomon's wisdom, because it plays a part through all of this, even the building of the temple and what God allowed him to, be able to do. But we do reach a point in Solomon's life as he's progressing through his life, because I think that he is king for 40 years. So, within 40 years, you start out as a young person, you have life experiences, you get older. Often we say as we get older, we, gain more wisdom. And there's a lot of truth to that. But there are times, though, that age doesn't necessarily mean that a person is wise. And we already kind of touched on that, before, where just because a person's wise doesn't always necessarily mean they use that wisdom well. So age doesn't necessarily equate to wisdom. We can gain a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. And again, I think it all comes down to what do we do with that knowledge, with that wisdom. Solomon, unfortunately, shifted focus as he went. He began to really struggle. It comes a point, if you go with me, skip a couple of chapters to 1 Kings chapter 11. We see that Solomon begins to turn from the wisdom of God. He really, in a way, misuses his wisdom. And that can happen too, can't we? A very wise person can take wisdom and just totally turn it around, to something that's very unwise. And that's kind of what Solomon did. He seemed to really become a very selfish individual and more focused on what his desires were. And the biggest thing that he struggled with was his marriages to these other nations, the wives that he gained from these foreign idolatrous nations. And look with me at chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. And just for a moment, which we didn't talk about this, but if you go back to chapter 3, and we spent some time looking at that, chapter 3, verse 1, right before we get into the wisdom aspect of Solomon, look at verse 1 of 1 Kings chapter 3. It says, Now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall all around Jerusalem. So that even kind of at that time, it wasn't the most wise thing for him to do. And that was just prior to us talking about the wisdom that he would gain. Now, look at it later in his life. Going back to chapter 11, he's marrying all of these women and just constantly doing this. Verse 2, it goes on to say, From the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, You shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. Isn't that interesting? The wisdom that God gave him, he kind of brushed it aside, and it became more of a wisdom of self. And that happens, doesn't it? It happens in the world still. But a man of God, like we said earlier, he wasn't perfect, and he did struggle. And this may somewhat be reflective, going back to his father David, and you remember the Bathsheba incident, that, and of course Solomon wasn't, born at that time, but, probably hearing about that story, what his father did, sometimes the negative impacts of a parent still can weigh heavy on a child, And I know there's no perfect parents out there, and we all do our very best. But sometimes these very significant negative things that happen and parents' decisions that they make that aren't good, that aren't healthy, that are detrimental to their family, I think it still carries an impact on their children. And it seemed to be that may have carried over from David, Yes. That's exactly right. And I work in the counseling field, and that's what I see so often happening as a result of, fatherless families or family dynamics where you don't have the parents involved, or you have one parent or another. So something is just, not to the full picture of it, I think, as God has envisioned the family to be. And it does create a lot of issues for their children. Exactly. A very good point. And it seems to be that could have impacted Solomon. Again, while Solomon wasn't, of course, in the picture at the time, hearing about the things that his father did still may have impacted him. But just think about that as you kind of go down verse 3, staying in chapter 11 there. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. And there's something to be said for the influence of people, isn't it? The New Testament talks about, friendships even, that bad kind of morals are corrupted through associations with bad company. What an impact that makes when we're keeping company with people that aren't what they ought to be, or bad examples. Even Christians can fall away through the bad example of friends or somebody that they're close with. So we're not immune to it, And Solomon definitely wasn't immune to it either. But my mind cannot fathom him having that many wives and concubines. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. How could there be anything good to come out of that? What's that? That's right. Yeah, that's right. How could you do it? It doesn't make sense. And it just destroyed his life. And that's what we see happening. And if you go down verse 4, I just want to add this verse in. I don't have it up on the PowerPoint. It says there, for it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods. And his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. Now, that is significant. And again, this is just me. I still feel like by the end of Ecclesiastes that Solomon had possibly made a turnaround, possibly maybe had repented. Again, Bible doesn't say, and I can't go beyond that to speculate or to say yes he did or no he didn't. So it's one of those unknowns, but it could very well have been that he came back around to that. But if so, it was way later in his life. Now, David, while those things with Bathsheba happen, kind of midlife for him, it seems to be that David was outside of a relationship after the Bathsheba incident for about a year before Nathan came to him. So David was sort of still kind of in the prime of his life and made that turnaround and that repentance. And from there, continued to walk with God and do his will. Solomon, though, spent a good chunk of the latter part of his life outside of a relationship with God. So in that way, it was very different than his father. And Solomon really, really fell deep into this idol worship. And you'll look at verse 5 and so on. It talks about the different idols and the gods that he worshipped. And just imagine how God felt to see a man, that he loved and that he gave all of this to turn from him. What would happen just as his father David suffered repercussions of his sin? Because you remember, David would lose his infant son Also, the Bible talks about the sword would not depart from David's house. And that's very true, wasn't it? Because David would go on to lose a couple other sons, adult sons, later on. Absalom being one of them. David had it hard. Even though he repented, he had it hard. And God judged him for his sins. Well, Solomon was also going to be judged for the sins that he did. It actually would come down to, if you stay in chapter 11, verse 11 says, "Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant." And what God is really saying here is that he is going to take Solomon's kingdom and he's going to divide that up after Solomon dies. And he does, doesn't he? And that begins this whole process of the next few hundred years of Israel's struggles in obedience to God. Because ultimately what would happen with both Israel, which was the northern nations, 11 nations, and Judah being the southern nation, both were carried off into captivity. The north was carried off into Assyrian captivity while the southern Judah was carried off into Babylonian captivity. Well, why were they all carried off into captivity? What ended up happening to the nation? They just fell away, didn't they? And if you really think about historically what happened with both north and south, the northern and southern nations, they fell into idolatry as well, didn't they? Corrupt kings, idol worship, all of that stuff. Well, guess what Solomon was doing? The same thing, wasn't he? Here's why I say that. Because the lessons that we learn from Solomon, I think, are this. And there's more than just these few, of course. But when it comes to what happened with Israel and Judah, poor wisdom does affect others. Does it affect the person making bad choices? It does, doesn't it? But it does affect others around them. Going back to the idea of what we were saying earlier with the families, when there's not a father in the picture, or there's a division that's happened with the family, how it affects the children and other family members, that's a direct product of those kinds of things happening. I think Solomon's choice of poor use of wisdom later in his life, and God punishing him by taking the kingdom away from him and dividing it, was really a direct connection to the sins and his wickedness. Because usually the idea is a nation will be like its king. Does that make sense? If you got a king or you got somebody in power ruling a nation is often going to be like its leader. Does that make sense? So if a nation or if a leader is doing well, doing the right thing, taking care of their people, well, the people are going to follow suit and they're going to do very similar things. But if you got a wicked person in power, the nation often follows that same path, don't they? Similar. Not every person, of course, but a big majority will follow. And I think this is what happened with Solomon. His choice of intermarrying all of these wives, getting into idolatry, and God dividing the kingdom after he died really affected the generations to come after Solomon. His own son somewhat struggled. Then you got the other one, Jeroboam, who was the king of kind of what would end up being the maybe the northern kingdom, I think. Yeah, he was just a very, bad person, and they rarely had a good king in their history. Judah had several good ones, but ultimately the nation fell away. So that is kind of a takeaway lesson, I think, that poor wisdom affects others. But on the other hand, proper wisdom keeps proper priorities, okay? Now, with Solomon, this kind of looks more at his earlier life when he was properly following wisdom and, doing that kind of thing. That it did well for him and the nation. And here's a big thing. Let's think about it even in terms of the New Testament, because I think we can apply New Testament principles here. Proper wisdom, in terms of proper priorities, think about what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6. Okay, let's turn over there because I think we've got to really hear what Jesus says on this matter. So Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, Jesus says, "But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." So Jesus himself is really saying, when you've got proper wisdom, and this is wisdom that is really of God, because we can have godly wisdom, can't we? That comes through his word, through our study, through our understanding of it, but our application of it, we're going to do exactly what Jesus says there. We've got to keep the kingdom first. Keep God first in our life. And God's going to take care of the rest for us. He's going to provide these other things. So he's kind of saying that in relation to, what he says right above there in those other verses ahead of that is, some people worry about what am I going to wear? What am I going to, all of this stuff. But Jesus says, hey, put the kingdom first. Spiritually, that's got to be the most important thing. And when you've got that and you put God first, God's going to provide the rest for you. He's going to provide you the opportunity to work and to meet those needs. And I think all of these good providential things that God's able to do in our life, God's going to take care of that. So proper wisdom says proper priorities come in their right order, don't they? So God first. But also think about this, God's will. Kind of is very opposite of how that came out for Solomon, wasn't it? Where he became selfish. Jesus continues to say, keep God first, but keep his will first too. Don't lose track of that. Don't become engrossed in self that you would lose that. So that kind of made me think of, like John chapter 15. And look at verse 14. Jesus says, "You are my friends if you do whatever I command you." Well, we got a relationship with God if we're doing his will, putting his will first and following it and living that out. Again, that's proper wisdom. And ultimately, it leads us to the proper blueprint of worship. Going back to John 4 in verse 24, Jesus says, "God is spirit. Those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." Proper wisdom says God's will is going to tell me how to worship him. Did Solomon follow that proper wisdom? He didn't, did he? Because his worship wasn't proper to God in those days. He was sacrificing to these idols, and he lost his way. And another little point on this is that God's wisdom allows for his blessings. And ultimately, he dwells with his people. 2 Corinthians 6, 17 and 18 talk about that. Talk about, come out from among the people, and you'll be my people, and I will have that relationship with you. God's going to dwell with his people. When Israel was doing right, God had a strong relationship with them, didn't he? But when they turned from him, they cast that away. And it wasn't that God wanted that separation. They chose it. Solomon chose that separation from God. So again, that wasn't proper wisdom, but proper wisdom says that when we follow God's will, he's going to bless us. And then Solomon, again, this idea of coming back to God, potentially could have been the case. And I say that because if you go to Ecclesiastes chapter 12, after he's gone through all of this under the sun and which again, selfish kind of living versus godly living. Chapter 12 kind of sums it all up, and this is the famous verse that he writes in verse 13. "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Seems to be, in this, I believe, Ecclesiastes was written in his late life, that he came back to this wisdom of God, and could very well have been that he returned to God through repentance. Again, Bible doesn't say, but could possibly be the case that he did. Here's kind of my little summation of it, Solomon's life. When you look at some of his writings, his early life seems to be when Song of Solomon was written. You remember that book of love? Solomon in his younger years, he was a man of love, wasn't he? That got him into trouble. But in the proper way, that is a good thing. And he was writing about that. We get into his midlife time, I think that's where the Proverbs were written. Those are really his wisdom being on display. Remember us talking about that one part written about the two mothers. Well, that was of wisdom, but look at Proverbs and the wisdom that's written. And I think that is really, again, when Solomon was doing the right thing, had a good relationship with God. And the Proverbs were kind of written in that time. But you see late in life, after he had all of these struggles and got into all of that, idolatry and the wives and everything, then we see late life, Ecclesiastes was written, where he was kind of debating in his own mind, under the sun, what does it mean? Living for God, what does it mean? Where's joy found? Where's all this found? That's where I think we come to that chapter 12, the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep his commandments. That's why we're here. If we're ever looking for the answer of life, it's right there. We're here to serve God. Through serving him is where we're going to find true joy, true peace in our lives. And I think Solomon may have finally found that and understood that. So as we kind of wrap up our lessons, I think we've got like 2 minutes left. I'll just bring them up there. Solomon is a great example of wisdom. We've looked at the various things that he did, succeeded when he followed God's wisdom, but he struggled when he relied on himself. But for ourselves, we can be wise people, and we know that we can obey him and do his will, because through that, we get to look forward to the reward of heaven, don't we? And now we can be saved from our sins, and we can look forward to that. So it's such a blessing that we can learn such great lessons from Solomon. While he struggled, I think he learned, maybe later in life about what it really means to serve God. And that's what we see in, just very quickly, Matthew chapter 7 is just really talking about that very thing that, that he talks about the wise man building his house on the rock and the foolish man building his house on the sand. That's where that applies. Because to be wise people is going to build our faith and our trust on the rock, which is Jesus. As we kind of wrap up, any thoughts, any questions? I appreciate your all's time. I know we covered a lot of material. I tried to keep it within that time, so that worked out okay. Thank you all so much. Appreciate the time with you this evening. You're welcome. Very welcome.
Well, how was class? Really good. Learned some things, did you? All right, who can tell me what the theme of our VBS is this week? Keegan? Good. What are we talking about in our royal adventure? Great what? Kings, all right. Good. What king did we talk about tonight? Solomon, all right. Name one thing that Solomon is known for. Is he? Temple. Name one more. He's wise. Absolutely. Good job. Who can name their teacher? Can you name your teacher? Oh, he's the teacher. Oh, good. You raised them well, Paul. All right. Well, that was a good job. You got an answer? No? Okay. All right. Well, I guarantee you that you all were taught very well in your classes tonight. Keith did a fine job out here with us, and we are all more knowledgeable because of it. And I really appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Before I forget, we got to give away our awards, our banners. Tonight, we had a total of 54 people. That's pretty good. Now, the 1-year-olds through kindergarten had 7 in their class, so that's good. First, second, and third grade had 5, and the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade had 8, and the teens had 6. So it looks like the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade won tonight's attendance banner. Come get it, someone. Yay. Nice haircut. All right, now for the quiet banner. This is the tough one. And judging what I saw when you went in and out, I believe that the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade class will take home the quiet banner this evening. Congratulations. Good job. Listen, until you all get Cassie out of your class, it's probably not going to happen. All right, we had a good night, and I guarantee you everybody's going to win a banner this week. It always seems to work out that way, doesn't it? We are thankful for the Coles for coming out with and hanging with us this evening, and Keith's preaching, his teaching. He's a really good teacher. Those of you who you probably all heard him, but those of you all were teachers and didn't get to hear him, he goes over things so well, and anybody can understand it. He's really good. So I'm sure we'll have him back again or two. Let's sing one more song, and then after that, I'm going to ask Eddie if he will lead us in a closing prayer, and then we'll get out of here. But remember, we don't want any kiddie pancakes, so don't run outside where all the cars are moving around, because you might get hurt. You might get hurt worse than hurt, all right? We don't want anybody to get hurt. You might be a kiddie pancake, so you're not going to run in the parking lot. Right. Man, what'd you feed them? I love it. I did. Good memory. Good job. I said that last year. All right. Yeah, so be safe. Don't go running out the door. Stay around the adults. Make sure you get to your car okay and nobody turns into a pancake. Okay? Yeah, pancake. I'd be a triple stack. Oh, yeah. All right. Let's sing a song. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. He answers prayer. love him so. I love him so. I love him so. He's so good to me. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. All right, tomorrow at 7 o'clock, be back and bring somebody with you because we're going to have a goal of 65 people tomorrow night, okay? So everybody bring somebody and we'll go up and whichever class has more people than they did tonight, whoever goes up the most will win the banner tomorrow, okay? All right, that's all. Be really quiet and we're going to have Mr. Eddie to lead us in a closing prayer.
Our Father, who art in heaven, we are thankful again for the day you provided for us, for all the blessings that come from the things that you've created and made for us to enjoy. We are indeed thankful. We're thankful for Keith tonight being with us and for all the teachers and their hard work in presenting the lessons and their study. We're thankful for each one and thankful for all those who attend. Help us always to look to your word for the wisdom that we need in our lives to make the proper decisions. And help us always to put the kingdom first in all that we do. Forgive us of any wrong